Comment where you're watching from today, as we share a story about how a simple stop at a roadside diner became a moment that would change lives forever. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Route 23 in central Ohio, where Linda Wilson had been serving coffee and comfort food at the Willow Creek Diner for the past 15 years. The small establishment, with its worn leather booths and slightly flickering neon sign, had seen its share of travelers, but none quite like the one who would walk through its doors that evening. The diner was quieter than usual, with only a few regulars scattered among the booths. Thomas Clark, a retired veteran who came in every Thursday for the meatloaf special, sat in his usual corner. Sarah Davis, a young single mother working double shifts at the local factory, occupied a window seat with her 2 children, carefully counting out dollars for their dinner. Linda moved between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made this dance her life's work. Her uniform, though clean and pressed, showed signs of wear that matched the slight tremor in her hands, a testament to years of carrying heavy plates and even heavier burdens. What none of her customers knew was that this might be one of her last shifts at the diner she had come to think of as home. The owner, Robert Harris, had broken the news last week. The diner was struggling, and without a significant turnaround, he would have to sell to a developer who planned to replace it with a chain restaurant. Linda had kept the news to herself, not wanting to burden her regular customers who had their own struggles to bear. The bell above the door chimed as a well-dressed woman entered, pausing briefly to take in the scene. Usha Vance, though few would recognize her in this small town, carried herself with quiet dignity rather than the self-importance one might expect from someone of her position. She chose a booth near the window, away from the other customers. Margaret Moore, the young waitress training under Linda, reached for a menu, but Linda gently touched her arm. "I'll take this one," she said softly, something about the newcomer's presence drawing her in. Margaret nodded, returning to her task of refilling sugar dispensers. As Linda approached the booth, she noticed the subtle details that set this customer apart: the quality of her clothing, the elegant simplicity of her jewelry, the way she studied the worn menu with genuine interest rather than resignation. But it was the warmth in her eyes as she looked up that caught Linda off guard. "Welcome to Willow Creek Diner," Linda said, her voice carrying the natural hospitality that had made her a fixture in this establishment. "Our specialty today is the meatloaf, but between you and me, the pot roast is what keeps people coming back." Usha smiled, a gesture that transformed her entire face. "I'd love to try both, actually. One to eat here and one to take with me. It's been a long day of meetings, and there's something about diners like this that feels more like home than any fancy restaurant." The simple honesty in her voice struck a chord with Linda. As she wrote down the order, she noticed Sarah's children at the next table, trying not to stare at the elegant stranger while their mothers studied the menu with worried eyes. Michael Miller, the cook who had worked alongside Linda for the past decade, called out, "An order ready," and Linda moved efficiently between tasks, years of experience guiding her steps. Yet she found her attention drawn back to the quiet woman in the window booth, who seemed to be taking in every detail of the diner with thoughtful consideration. As Linda brought Usha's coffee, she overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Elizabeth Garcia, another regular, was telling her friend about the mounting medical bills from her husband's recent surgery. Karen Williams, a teacher at the local school, was grading papers while nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold, worry lines creasing her forehead as she calculated how to make ends meet on a teacher's salary. These were the stories of Willow Creek Diner, the daily struggles, small victories, and quiet dignity of people doing their best to get by. Linda had been their confidant, their cheerleader, and sometimes their only source of comfort for years. The thought of the diner closing, of these people losing their gathering place, weighed heavily on her heart. Usha seemed to notice these details too, her gaze lingering on Sarah's children sharing a single plate of fries, on Thomas Clark's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup, on the way Linda subtly slipped an extra piece of pie onto Elizabeth's plate without charging for it. When Linda brought Usha's meal, the woman gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Would you join me for a moment? If you're not too busy." The request, polite but unexpected, caught Linda off guard. She glanced around the diner, but Margaret gave her an encouraging nod, indicating she could handle the other tables. "Just for a minute," Linda agreed, sliding into the booth. Up close, she could see the genuine interest in Usha's eyes, the way she seemed to be really seeing the people around her, not just looking past them. "How long have you worked here?" Usha asked, cutting into her meatloaf with apparent appreciation. 15 years this August, Linda replied, her voice softening with pride and nostalgia. "Started when my kids were still in school. Now they're grown with children of their own, but this place, it's become more than just a job." Usha nodded, understanding evident in her expression. Places like this are the heart of a community. They're where people come not just for food, but for connection, for a moment of peace in their day. Linda felt tears threatening to form but held them back with practiced control. Yes, that's exactly it. Which makes it harder knowing. She caught herself, realizing she was about to share the diner's troubles with a complete stranger. But Usha's expression had shifted, become more focused. Knowing what? Perhaps it was the genuine concern in her voice, or maybe it was simply that Linda had been carrying this burden alone for too long, but the story came spilling out. She told Usha about the diner's financial struggles, about Robert's impossible choice, about the developer's plans to replace this piece of community history with something shinier but soulless. As she spoke, Linda noticed that Usha was taking everything in, not just her words, but the whole scene around them. The way Thomas Clark shared his newspaper with Elizabeth Garcia, how Margaret slipped an extra cookie to Sarah's children, the familiar banter between Michael in the kitchen and the regulars at the counter. Sometimes, Linda concluded, wiping her hands nervously on her apron, the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars and cents. Usha's response was interrupted by a commotion at Sarah's table. Her younger child had accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and Sarah's face crumpled as she tried to clean up the mess while apologizing profusely, clearly overwhelmed by one more small disaster in a day full of them. Without hesitation, Linda grabbed a towel and moved to help, her practiced hands making quick work of the spill while she assured Sarah that accidents happen. When she returned to Usha's table, she found the woman watching the scene with an expression that seemed to hold both sadness and determination. "I should let you get back to work," Usha said, but her tone suggested this conversation was far from over. "Could you pack up that pot roast for me? And, would you mind adding a few extra portions to go?" As Linda prepared the takeout orders, she watched Usha take out her phone and make a few quiet calls, her voice too low to overhear. There was something about her manner that suggested wheels being set in motion, decisions being made. The sun had set by the time Usha prepared to leave, the diner now bathed in the warm glow of its overhead lights. As she stood to pay her bill, she paused, looking around one more time at the scene before her, at the community that had unknowingly revealed itself to her over a simple dinner. "Thank you, Linda," she said, handling her credit card, "for the meal and for the conversation. Sometimes the most important meetings happen in the most unexpected places." As Usha walked toward the door, Linda noticed her stop briefly at Sarah's table, then at Thomas Clark's, having quiet conversations with each of them. She left the extra portions of pot roast with them, brushing off their protests with gentle smiles. The bell chimed again as Usha left, and Linda stood for a moment, watching her elegant figure disappear into the gathering darkness. Something about the encounter left her with an odd feeling, not of conclusion, but of beginning. "Nice lady," Margaret commented, coming to stand beside her. "You don't get many like that around here." Linda nodded, unable to shake the feeling that this evening would prove to be more significant than any of them realized. "No," she agreed, "you certainly don't." As she returned to her routine, serving coffee and clearing tables, Linda couldn't help but notice that Usha had left something on her table besides just a generous tip. There was a business card, face down, with something written on the back. But that would have to wait. Right now, there were customers to serve, stories to hear, and a community to hold together, even if only for a little while longer. Let us know in the comments if you've ever experienced an unexpected encounter that changed your life. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. The morning light was just beginning to creep through the windows of Willow Creek Diner when Linda Wilson finally had a moment to look at the business card Usha Vance had left behind. The breakfast rush had kept her busy, with Richard Sanchez and his construction crew filling the counter seats, and Mary Robinson dropping in for her usual morning coffee before heading to the post office where she worked. The card itself was elegant but simple, identifying Usha Vance as a prominent business consultant and investor. But it was the handwritten note on the back that made Linda's hands tremble. "Some things are worth saving. Call me at 3 p.m. today. This community deserves to keep its heart." Sandra Williams, who had just started her morning shift, noticed Linda's expression. "Everything okay?" she asked, her young face showing concern for her mentor. Linda quickly tucked the card into her apron pocket as the bell above the door chimed. Elizabeth Garcia entered with her husband David, who was moving slowly, still recovering from his surgery. The couple had been coming to the diner for their morning coffee for over a decade, but lately, their visits had become less frequent as medical bills mounted. "The usual?" Linda asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. Elizabeth nodded gratefully, but there was worry in her eyes as she helped David into their regular booth. Throughout the morning, Linda found her thoughts returning to the mysterious woman from the previous evening and her cryptic note. She watched as Thomas Clark shared his newspaper with Patricia Harris, as Jennifer Lee helped her elderly mother Margaret into a corner booth, as Michael Miller called out orders from the kitchen with his usual cheerful efficiency. At precisely 3 p.m., during the quiet lull between lunch and dinner, Linda stepped into the small office at the back of the diner. Robert Harris, the owner, was there going through bills, his forehead creased with concern. "Robert," Linda said softly, "I need to make a phone call." He looked up, surprised by the unusual request, but nodded. Linda's hands shook slightly as she dialed the number from the business card. After 2 rings, a familiar warm voice answered. "Mrs. Wilson," Usha Vance said, as if she'd been expecting the call at exactly this moment. "I'm glad you reached out. I've spent the night thinking about your diner and the people I met there." Linda listened, her heart racing, as Usha outlined what she had observed during her brief visit. Not just the financial struggles of the diner, but the way it served as a crucial thread in the community's fabric. "The young mother, Sarah Davis," Usha continued, "I spoke with her briefly before I left. She works at the Miller manufacturing plant, doesn't she? Double shifts to support her children." "Yes," Linda confirmed, remembering Sarah's careful counting of dollars for dinner. "And Thomas Clark, the veteran who sits in the corner booth, he mentioned he's been coming there since before his wife passed away. Said it's the only place that still feels like home." Linda felt tears forming in her eyes. "This place means everything to so many people." "That's exactly why I'm calling," Usha said. "I've done some research overnight. The developer who wants to buy the property, Charles Rodriguez's company, has a pattern of targeting small businesses in communities like yours. They promise progress but deliver generic replacements that destroy the very thing that makes these places special." Robert Harris had stopped pretending to work on his bills, now openly listening to Linda's side of the conversation. "But what can we do?" Linda asked, voicing the question that had haunted them all for weeks. "I'd like to make a proposal," Usha replied. "Not just to save the diner, but to help it thrive. But first, I need to understand more about the community it serves. Could you gather some people together? The regulars, the staff, anyone who considers Willow Creek Diner a second home. I'd like to meet with them tomorrow evening, after closing." Linda looked at Robert, who nodded slowly, hope beginning to replace the resignation in his eyes. The next few hours were a flurry of quiet conversations and phone calls. Karen Thompson, who taught at the local high school, promised to spread the word to other regulars. Barbara Williams, who had been coming to the diner since it opened, immediately offered to bring her famous apple pie to the meeting. Sarah Davis was hesitant at first, worried about finding childcare, until Linda assured her that the children would be welcome. "This meeting is about community," she explained, "and they're part of ours." As the evening progressed, Linda noticed something remarkable happening. People who heard about the meeting began dropping by the diner, not just to eat but to share stories. Susan Moore recalled how the diner had been the first place she felt welcome when she moved to town 20 years ago. Joseph Robinson remembered how Linda had kept the diner open during a terrible snowstorm 5 years ago, providing hot coffee and shelter to stranded travelers. William White, a local historian, arrived with a folder full of old photographs showing the diner's evolution over the decades. "This place isn't just a business," he explained, spreading the pictures across the counter. "It's a living history of our town." Nancy Thomas, who worked at the bank down the street, shared how she'd met her husband at the diner's counter. "He kept coming in for coffee every day for weeks before he finally asked me out," she laughed, touching the worn counter fondly. Michael Miller emerged from the kitchen during a quiet moment to show Linda a notebook he'd been keeping. "Been writing down all the special recipes we've developed over the years," he said. "The ones that people ask for by name. Figured it might be important." Lisa Garcia, Elizabeth's daughter, arrived after her nursing shift at the local hospital, still in her scrubs. "Mom told me about the meeting tomorrow," she said. "I switched shifts so I could be there. This place, it's where I studied for my nursing exams. Where Dad came after every chemo treatment because the coffee made him feel normal again. We can't lose it." As closing time approached, Linda was surprised to see Mark Martinez, the local real estate agent, enter the diner. He looked uncomfortable as he approached the counter. "Heard about what's happening," he said quietly. "Listen, I've been doing some digging. That developer, Rodriguez's company, they've done this before in other towns. Promise the moon, deliver a parking lot. But there might be some irregularities in their paperwork. Thought you should know." Linda thanked him, adding his name to the growing list of people coming to tomorrow's meeting. The support was overwhelming, but it also highlighted exactly what they stood to lose. By the time she locked up that night, Linda had confirmed over 40 people for the meeting. Sandra Williams had offered to help set up extra chairs. Richard Anderson, who owned the hardware store next door, said he'd bring extra folding tables. As she drove home that night, Linda thought about how one unexpected dinner guest had set all this in motion. She remembered the way Usha had really looked at people, had seen past the surface to the stories underneath. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Linda arrived early to find Robert Harris already there, carefully cleaning the windows. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, "at least we know we're not alone in this." Throughout the day, people kept dropping by to confirm they were coming. Margaret Moore brought in fresh flowers for all the tables. Thomas Clark arrived with his old Marine Corps photo album, saying there were pictures in there of the diner from the 1970s. David Smith, the local banker, stopped in for lunch and pulled Linda aside. "I've been looking at some numbers," he said. "If what I'm hearing about this Usha Vance is true, there might be possibilities we haven't considered." By afternoon, there was an energy in the diner that felt almost magical. James Thompson and his wife Betty spent an hour sharing stories about their first date at the counter 50 years ago. Christopher Anderson, who now ran the local paper, came in to take photographs, saying this was a moment worth documenting. As closing time approached, Linda looked around at the worn booths, the slightly crooked pictures on the walls, the coffee-stained counter that had heard thousands of stories. She thought about all the lives that had intersected here, all the moments big and small that had played out under these fluorescent lights. Sandra Lee, the newest waitress, touched her arm gently. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "you've shown us what community really means." The last regular customer left at 7:30 p.m. Linda, Robert, and the staff quickly cleared tables and rearranged the furniture to accommodate the coming crowd. Michael Miller prepared coffee and set out plates for Barbara's pie. At 7:45, people began arriving. Thomas Clark, wearing his best jacket. Sarah Davis with her children, who immediately began helping to arrange chairs. Elizabeth and David Garcia, moving slowly but determined to be present. The bell above the door chimed again and again as the diner filled with familiar faces, each one carrying hope and determination. At precisely 8 p.m., the bell chimed one more time. Usha Vance entered, carrying a leather briefcase and accompanied by two people who were clearly business associates. But unlike the previous evening's elegant attire, she was dressed simply, as if understanding that tonight wasn't about power or status but about community. Let us know in the comments if you've ever been part of a community coming together to save something precious. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in the connections we forge with others. The fluorescent lights of Willow Creek Diner cast a warm glow over the gathered crowd as Usha Vance made her way to the front of the room. Linda Wilson noticed how she took a moment to look at each face, acknowledging the importance of every person present. The two people who had accompanied her, introduced as Patricia Clark, a financial advisor, and John Martinez, a community development specialist, quietly took seats near the counter. "Thank you all for coming," Usha began, her voice carrying easily through the packed diner. "Last night, I stopped here by chance. I was tired after a long day of meetings, looking for a quiet place to eat. Instead, I found something remarkable. I found the heart of a community." Sarah Davis's younger child shifted in her lap, and Usha smiled warmly at them before continuing. "What I witnessed in just a few hours told me everything I needed to know about this place. I saw Thomas Clark sharing his newspaper with Elizabeth Garcia. I watched Linda Wilson slip extra pie to those who needed it. I observed Margaret Moore helping an elderly customer to her car." Robert Harris stood nervously by the register, his hands clasped together. Betty Anderson, who had been coming to the diner for breakfast every morning for 20 years, reached over and patted his arm reassuringly. "But what truly caught my attention," Usha continued, "was how this place serves as more than just a restaurant. It's a meeting point, a safe haven, a place where people come not just to eat, but to connect, to belong." She opened her briefcase and removed several folders. "I've spent the last 24 hours doing research. The developer, Charles Rodriguez's company, has a pattern. They target establishments like this one, places with deep community roots but financial struggles. They make promises about progress and jobs, but what they really do is tear out the heart of communities." William White, the local historian, nodded grimly. "They did the same thing in Millbrook, 2 counties over. The diner there had been running since 1952. Usha spread some documents on a nearby table. "Exactly. But here's what they don't want you to know. In every town where they've succeeded, small business ownership has declined by 40%. Community gathering spaces have disappeared. Property values initially rise, but within 5 years, they typically fall below their original levels." David Smith, the banker, leaned forward with interest. "That matches what I've been seeing in the reports." "But," Usha said, and now there was a note of hope in her voice, "I believe we have an opportunity here. Not just to save the diner, but to make it stronger. To turn it into a model for how small businesses can thrive in the modern era while preserving what makes them special." She gestured to Patricia Clark, who stood and opened her own folder. "We've analyzed the diner's finances. The core business is actually solid. The problems stem from outdated equipment that's costly to maintain and a mortgage rate that's well above current market levels." Robert Harris blinked in surprise. Linda knew he'd been too proud to refinance, seeing it as admitting failure. "My proposal is this," Usha continued. "I want to create a community investment trust. Local ownership, local control, but with the resources and expertise to modernize where needed while preserving what makes this place special." Michael Miller spoke up from where he stood near the kitchen. "What exactly does that mean for the diner itself?" Usha smiled. "It means new equipment for your kitchen, Michael. It means repairs to the building. It means a website where people can order your famous pot roast for pickup. But it also means keeping every employee, maintaining every recipe, and preserving the atmosphere that makes this place home." Sandra Williams raised her hand. "And the prices? We have a lot of customers on fixed incomes." "The basic menu and prices stay the same," Usha assured her. "We'll add some premium options for those who want them, but the heart of the business remains affordable, community-focused dining." John Martinez stepped forward then, laying out architectural drawings. "We've also identified ways to improve the space without changing its character. A small meeting room in back for community groups. Better accessibility for elderly and disabled customers. Energy-efficient systems that will reduce operating costs." Linda watched as hope began to replace worry on the faces around her. Jennifer Lee, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "My mother met my father in this diner. They sat at that counter every Saturday morning for 40 years until he passed. I've been worried that those kinds of stories wouldn't happen anymore." "Those stories are exactly what we want to preserve," Usha replied warmly. "But we need everyone's help to make this work." She explained the structure of the community trust, how local residents could invest, how profits would be shared, how decisions would be made by a board comprising both business experts and community members. Karen Thompson, the high school teacher, raised her hand. What about the developer? Won't they just offer more money? Usha's smile turned slightly mischievous. As it happens, my firm has already purchased the option to buy this property. Mr. Rodriguez's company won't be a factor. A murmur of relief ran through the crowd. Richard Anderson, who had been studying the financial documents, looked up. These numbers, they actually make sense. This could work. It will work, Usha said firmly. Because it's not just about money. It's about understanding what makes a place like this valuable beyond its balance sheet. She turned to Robert Harris. Mr. Harris, you've carried this burden alone for too long. Let the community help. Let us turn this struggle into a triumph. Robert stood slowly, looking around at the faces that had become family over the years. I started working here as a busboy when I was 16, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Bought it from the original owner when he retired. Never wanted to be anything but a small-town diner owner. Never thought that would become so hard to be. Linda stepped forward to stand beside him, remembering all the times he'd helped employees through tough times, extended credit to customers who were struggling, kept the doors open during storms and holidays because people needed a place to go. The world's changing, Usha acknowledged. But that doesn't mean we have to lose what matters. Sometimes change can help us preserve what's most important. Sarah Davis spoke up from where she sat with her children. What can we do to help? Some of us, we don't have much to invest. Investment isn't just about money, Usha replied. It's about time, skills, commitment. We need people to share their stories, to help document the diner's history. We need volunteers to help with renovations. We need everyone who believes in this place to be part of saving it. The next hour was filled with people stepping forward, offering what they could. Barbara Miller volunteered her accounting skills. Christopher Lee, who worked in marketing, offered to help create a social media presence. Thomas Clark said he'd coordinate with other veterans groups who used the diner for meetings. Lisa Garcia, still in her nurse's scrubs, suggested partnering with the hospital to provide healthy menu options. But please, she added with a smile, keep the apple pie exactly as it is. As the meeting continued, Linda noticed something remarkable happening. People who had been coming to the diner for years without really knowing each other were exchanging phone numbers, making plans, forming committees. The community wasn't just saving the diner was strengthening the community. Nancy White, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. My grandmother used to say that a town's not just buildings and streets. It's the places where people come together, where stories are shared, where memories are made. That's what we're really saving here. Usha nodded approvingly. Exactly. And that's why this model can work. Because it's not just about preserving a building or a business, it's about investing in the connections that make a community strong. By the time the meeting wound down, it was nearly midnight. People lingered, reluctant to leave, energized by the sense of possibility that had replaced their earlier fears. Michael Miller had kept the coffee flowing, and Barbara's pie had been reduced to crumbs. As the last of the crowd filed out, making plans to meet again, Usha turned to Linda. You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't taken a moment to really talk to me last night. To share not just the diner's struggles, but its soul. Linda felt tears forming in her eyes. I never thought, when you walked in, you just seemed like another customer. But you saw something worth saving. No, Usha corrected gently. I saw something that was already saving people every day. All I'm doing is making sure it can continue. Robert Harris approached them, looking years younger than he had that morning. I can't thank you enough, he began, but Usha held up her hand. Thank your community, she said. They're the ones who will make this work. I'm just providing tools and structure. The heart and soul of this place, that comes from all of you. As they prepared to leave, Linda looked around the diner, at the worn booths that had held so many conversations, the counter where so many friendships had begun, the windows that had watched the town change while the diner remained a constant. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and planning, meetings and decisions. But tonight, in the quiet after the meeting, she could already feel the change in the air. Not the kind of change that destroys, but the kind that renews, that builds on what matters most. Let us know in the comments if you've ever been part of saving something precious to your community. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones we build together. 6 months after that fateful evening when Usha Vance first walked into Willow Creek Diner, the transformation was complete. The early morning sun streamed through new energy-efficient windows, casting warm light across freshly upholstered booths and gleaming countertops. But more importantly, it illuminated the faces of a community that had come together to save their beloved gathering place. Linda Wilson stood behind the counter, wearing a crisp new uniform that bore the diner's redesigned logo, a simple willow tree with the original establishment date beneath it. The logo had been created by Sarah Davis's teenage daughter, who had revealed an unexpected talent for graphic design during the renovation process. Thomas Clark occupied his usual corner booth, now modified for easier access, sharing his morning paper with Elizabeth Garcia. The renovation had preserved every booth's original location while subtly updating the materials and comfort. "It's exactly the same," Thomas had remarked on reopening day, "only somehow better." The kitchen gleamed with new equipment, but Michael Miller still used his grandfather's seasoned cast iron skillet for the morning hash browns. "Some things you don't change," he'd insisted, and Usha had agreed immediately. The modernization had focused on efficiency and safety while preserving the cooking traditions that made the diner special. The small meeting room added to the back had quickly become a community hub. Karen Thompson used it for tutoring sessions after school. The local veterans group met there weekly. Sarah Davis had started a support group for single parents, sharing resources and childcare responsibilities. Robert Harris moved between tables with a newfound spring in his step. The Community Investment Trust had exceeded all expectations, with contributions ranging from significant financial investments to skilled labor during renovations. Richard Anderson had coordinated a team of local contractors who worked at cost, seeing it as an investment in their own community's future. The bell above the door chimed as Margaret Moore entered with her grandchildren. The sound was the same one that had welcomed customers for decades. They'd carefully preserved the original bell during renovations. She settled them into a booth as Linda brought over their usual order without being asked. "The children's reading program starts in an hour," Margaret reminded Linda. The diner's new community outreach coordinator, Jennifer Lee, had established several programs using the meeting room during off-peak hours. Today, local teenagers would be reading stories to younger children, earning community service credits while fostering a love of reading. Sandra Williams, now promoted to assistant manager, was training a new waitress, Mary Robinson. The diner's success had allowed them to hire additional staff, creating new jobs in the community. The training manual now included not just service protocols but the history of the diner and its role in the community. The front window displayed a framed article from the local paper, written by Christopher Anderson, titled "More Than a Diner: How Community Spirit Saved a Local Institution." The story had been picked up by regional media, leading other small towns to reach out for advice on preserving their own beloved establishments. Barbara Miller's accounting skills had proved invaluable in setting up the new financial systems. The diner now offered a sophisticated point-of-sale system, but they'd kept the old manual receipt pad for Thomas Clark, who preferred to calculate his tip the old-fashioned way. David Smith from the bank had become one of the trust's board members, along with Lisa Garcia, who represented the younger generation of customers. The board met monthly in the new meeting room, balancing tradition with innovation, ensuring the diner remained both financially viable and true to its community roots. At precisely 10 a.m., Usha Vance walked through the door. She had made it a point to visit monthly, not just to check on the investment but to maintain the connections she'd formed. Today was special. It marked 6 months since the reopening. "The usual?" Linda asked with a smile, already reaching for a coffee cup. She'd learned that Usha, despite her success, preferred simple diner coffee to fancy espresso drinks. "Please," Usha replied, sliding onto a counter stool. "And is Michael making his pot roast today? I've been thinking about it all week." Linda nodded. The pot roast, once just a daily special, had become somewhat famous after a food blogger discovered it. They now offered a take-home version, properly packaged and labeled with reheating instructions included. The additional revenue stream helped subsidize their commitment to keeping basic menu prices affordable. Sarah Davis hurried in, now wearing the uniform of a shift supervisor. The diner's success had allowed her to quit her second job, and she'd quickly shown a talent for management. Her children had become fixtures after school, doing homework in the corner booth while their mother worked. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah called out warmly, "wait until you see the numbers from the new weekend breakfast initiative." The diner had started offering early morning breakfast service for factory workers, filling a crucial need in the community while expanding their customer base. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of regulars and newcomers. William White, the historian, had set up a small display near the entrance, showing the diner's evolution through the decades. Today's photos included recent additions, the community coming together for renovations, the grand reopening celebration, the first meeting of the trust board. Elizabeth Garcia's husband David, now fully recovered from his surgery, had become part of the diner's delivery service for homebound seniors. What started as a volunteer initiative had grown into a sustainable program, ensuring that those who couldn't come to the diner could still remain connected to the community. Nancy Thomas stopped by with her granddaughter, pointing out the counter seat where she'd met her husband. The stories of the diner had been collected and documented, preserved in a leather-bound book that sat near the register. Customers often browsed through it while waiting for their orders, adding their own memories to the growing collection. As the lunch crowd began to arrive, Linda watched Usha engaging with customers, genuinely interested in their lives and stories. She had become more than an investor, she was part of the community she'd helped preserve. Patricia Harris, who had initially come as Usha's financial advisor, now regularly brought her family for Sunday brunch. "You can't get this atmosphere anywhere else," she'd explained. "This is what community really means." The trust's success had inspired others. 2 towns over, a historic bakery was adopting a similar model. Usha's firm had created a template for community investment that could be adapted for different businesses and locations, always focusing on preserving the essential character that made each place special. Robert Harris gathered everyone's attention by gently tapping a glass. The diner fell quiet as he began to speak. "6 months ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought we were at the end of our story. Instead, we were just beginning a new chapter." He gestured to the full tables, the busy kitchen, the meeting room where children were starting to gather for the reading program. "This place has always been about more than food. It's about belonging, about community, about the kind of connections that don't show up on balance sheets but mean everything in life." Linda watched as heads nodded in agreement. She saw Thomas Clark discreetly wipe his eyes, saw Sarah Davis hug her children close, saw Michael Miller beam with pride from the kitchen doorway. "Thanks to Mrs. Vance's vision," Robert continued, "and more importantly, thanks to every person in this room and hundreds more who believed in this place, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. We're not just preserving the past, we're building the future." Usha stood then, characteristically deflecting attention from herself. "This success belongs to all of you," she said. "I just provided a framework. You provided the heart, the soul, and the dedication that made it work." The celebration continued through the lunch rush, with regular customers sharing stories with first-time visitors, staff members moving efficiently between tables while still making time for personal connections, and the constant chime of the bell announcing new arrivals. As afternoon approached, Linda took a moment to step outside, looking at the restored facade with its proudly displayed, since 1952 sign. The willow tree logo caught the sunlight, casting a gentle shadow on the sidewalk. She remembered that evening 6 months ago, when a chance encounter had changed everything. But really, she realized, it hadn't changed the essence of Willow Creek Diner at all. It had simply given them the tools and support to continue being what they'd always been, a place where community wasn't just a word, but a living, breathing reality. Let us know in the comments about a place in your community that means more than its simple business purpose. Sometimes the most important places are the ones that bring us together, where every cup of coffee comes with a side of belonging.